Now, another issue I believe would contribute to a stronger future relationship is if both sides fostered a more open and issue-oriented communications environment. Too often in the past, we've talked at each other rather than with each other. In an environment where all points of view can be freely expressed and candidly discussed, we can make real progress. Stifling opposing points of view, or those views with which we disagree, stifling free speech, only makes all of us less well informed. I really can't think of a better way of putting this than was expressed by former Iranian President Mohammad Khatami in his inauguration speech before the Parliament in 1997, when he said, "The most stable and lasting system is the one which creates the least limitation to freedom of expression." In my view, freedom means freedom of thought and security to express those thoughts without fear of prosecution. He wanted to say, a government's authority is not realized by coercion or arbitrariness, but by legal acts, by respect for rights, and by encouraging people's participation in decision-making. People must believe that they have the right to determine their own destiny and that there are limits to government. We must try not to impose our personal preferences on our society at all costs. The government should even protect the rights of its opponents. You know, if we can square this circle, we will go a long way to establishing a relationship, I believe, that will address our mutual interests and needs in a very credible way. I mentioned the U.S. focus on fostering economic growth in Zimbabwe and the expansion of trade and investment ties between our two countries. Now, I know there are probably a few of you here who are saying, oh, come on, we all know about your sanctions. Yeah, it's true. Americans cannot do business with about 120 Zimbabweans, about 60 of the farms or companies they own, and about a dozen public enterprises. But let me say that if this economy is that dependent on 120 people and a few dozen companies, then we should be concerned with about a lot more than just sanctions. And as soon as the parties honor their commitments under the GPA to allow for a return of the rule of law, once state institutions are separated from partisan allegiances, and once credible elections are held and honored, there will be no reason to retain the few restrictions that are in place. Still, the fact is that this economy is much more vibrant than just the contribution of these few peoples and companies, and the U.S. is actively promoting Zimbabwe's economic recovery. We have a highly successful loan guarantee program to pump much-needed capital back into the agricultural sector to promote food security and help return Zimbabwe to its rightful place as the breadbasket of the region. We're working in the dairy, poultry, coffee, tea, and niche horticulture sectors to add value to produce at the local level and to establish market linkages within Zimbabwe and outside. We're endeavoring to work within the Kimberley process to reach a consensus agreement to allow for Zimbabwe to export certified diamonds from Marange while ensuring that the workers and local community rights are respected. And one of the efforts that I'm most excited about is my embassy's work in promoting more and better awareness among the American private sector of the huge opportunities that exist for both of our countries through expanded trade and investment relations. Earlier this year, with one of my colleagues, I attended a major international conference on doing business with Africa. Over the course of a 4-day conference, we spoke to hundreds of representatives from U.S., European, and African businesses and handed out information sheets that started with the sentence, "Zimbabwe is open for business." Given the interest that we sparked from that event, we then put on a trilateral business dialogue in conjunction with the U.S. Corporate Council on Africa, South Africa's Business Unity South Africa, where we brought together a dozen firms, each from the U.S., South Africa, and Zimbabwe, in Victoria Falls in June to talk about the opportunities for business here in Zimbabwe. We had Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Cargill, General Electric, and many other firms here to see for themselves the prospect for business in Zimbabwe. Building on the success of that event, we're now working with the American Business Association in Zimbabwe, or ABAZ as it's called, to assemble a delegation of Zimbabwean business leaders who will, along with me, attend a U.S.-Africa Business Summit in Washington, D.C. in October. Hopefully we'll be able to have them lead a day-long seminar on doing business in Zimbabwe that we expect to reach over 250 American firms and government officials. This kind of activity will continue as we move forward. And again, we're eager to work closely with the business community and with the Zimbabwean government across the political spectrum to find new and collaborative ways to build on these efforts for the mutual benefit of our two countries. There's so much more that we're doing, but I'm conscious of the time and the fact that I came a little late. My apologies for that. I'd like to allow time for discussion. Just let me affirm that beyond the political and economic engagement that I've already spoken of, the U.S. will continue our bread and butter activities and partnerships with the Zimbabwean people. We'll continue providing support for social service delivery and our commitment to work with the government and civil society to support the health sector, combat HIV/AIDS, prevent the spread and effects of malaria, provide textbooks to schools, bolster the health sector institutions, and provide emergency assistance if and where it may be needed, will continue. We'll also continue to advocate for the respect and protection of human rights, workers' rights, and equal protection for women and children. We'll continue to speak out when state prosecutors pursue politically motivated agendas and when the police are directed to serve as extensions of a party rather than institutions of the state. We'll continue to monitor and bring to light all such abuses of the rule of law. And let me be clear, we don't monitor and produce these reports on these events because we want to play the game of gotcha. We do it because we don't do it either because we support any particular party or any particular political perspective or because we want to score political points by casting blame. And we certainly don't do it because we think that we're devoid of these same challenges in the U.S. Heaven knows we're not. Instead, we advocate for these issues because it's the right thing to do to make this country stronger. We advocate for the protection of rights because Zimbabweans themselves have decided to enshrine these rights and ensure for their protection in your own laws, constitution, and international obligations. We highlight abuses not to accuse, but to shed light on events so that they can be corrected. Our intentions are not malicious. Rather, they are to provide incentives and often assistance to help protect the human dignity and integrity of all Zimbabweans. Of course, the U.S. is much more than just the U.S. government or the U.S. Embassy. People-to-people relations between our countries remain strong, and I fully expect them to continue to flourish. Zimbabwe's independence in 1980 occurred in the age of television and when the American baby boomers were in their 30s. And as such, this country's independence still retains a prominent position in the memory of the American public who continue to feel goodwill toward the country and its people. Americans remain in one of the top positions, you might be surprised to know, in terms of the number of tourists to Zimbabwe. And in the years to come, there are really beautiful opportunities for further partnerships between religious communities, youth organizations, tourist travel, trade delegations, you name it. We can all play active roles in promoting such interactions. And so in summary, I fundamentally believe that the future of U.S.-Zimbabwe relations is bright. The path will not always be smooth, but there's no reason why it can't always be on a positive trajectory. I see our relationship being punctuated not by restrictions or impediments, but by opportunities. The task before us is for each of us to seize those opportunities. And whether you prefer thinking about re-engagement or recultivating our partnerships, the first step is dialogue. As the personal representative of President Obama in Zimbabwe, I take very seriously his position of extending an open hand despite disagreements. The benefits of a better relationship are well worth the at times uncomfortable conversations that may take place. Still, the people of both our countries deserve better. And so my message is the same to our closest friends and to those with whom we've had the most conflicted of relationships. If you're coming from a position of sincerity and respect, my hand is open, my door is open, and my mind is open. Let's have the tough conversations. When we must, let's disagree, but let's do so without being disagreeable. And when we can, let's collaborate to advance our common interests. But let's reopen those lines of communication that are closed and rebuild the bridges of mutual confidence that we've allowed to fall into disrepair for the people of both of our nations. They deserve no less. Thank you very much.